We'll get those Live Viz Zipton clips, strap down those rods, and stow away those tackle bags because we are going fishing. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Bass 2 Anglers podcast. I'm your host, Keith Nicewanger, and I hope this episode finds you with 5 for 25 in your live well. But Officer Larry is going to need you to take a ride to headquarters so he can hook you up to a polygraph because nothing is final until the polygraph says it is. Larry?
Get her done!
Special thanks to all of you who have taken the time to like and follow our videos, and to all of you that have offered comments. We're trying to get better. We're building this channel, and your comments, your follows, they matter to us. So again, please like and follow, and we appreciate your comments always. Today, we are going in deep on the Delta. Steve Cooper is the popular host of the YouTube channel In Deep on the Delta, and he's going to give us some insight how to unlock that popular Northern California fishery. But first, if you like the content we produce on this channel, please hit the subscribe button. Larry?
Get her done!
Thank you. I would really like to thank all of our social media subscribers for being part of our platform, and I think we found a way to do this. Hit this quick response code and check out the cool products that our podcast partners offer, and in some cases, there are some nifty discounts for you to take advantage of. Go ahead, hit that QR code. Go ahead, hit that QR code. Larry?
Get her done!
I know I ask Larry to do a lot of things on this show, but he's always willing, he's always able to help us get these things done. Thank you. Do you like puzzles? The California Delta is a bass fishing puzzle. We know there are giants there. We know there are healthy numbers. We know there are miles of perfect looking cover for bass to hide out in. But we also know that the Delta can bring an angler to his or her knees. The conditions change literally by the minute. It can be a most humbling experience. Here's a history lesson for you, young fella. You like flipping, pitching, punching? Who doesn't? That all started on the California Delta. Yep, that was a California thing long before it was an anywhere else thing. You like frogging? Yep, that also started on the Delta. So before you get all judgy about California, and believe me, I've taken plenty of shots at my home state, it, particularly the Delta, has given us some of our most popular techniques and tactics that we see on the pro tours today. Our guest today has over 50 years of angling experience and is generally well thought of as an expert on the California Delta. His YouTube channel, In Deep on the Delta, is regarded as the go-to YouTube resource for current Delta fishing conditions. In fact, In Deep on the Delta is a must-watch for all tournament competitors. And you know they all tune in. if there's a tournament on the Delta, and there's 100 boats in that tournament, there are 100 views from boaters, and there's 100 views from non-boaters. So this is a channel that everybody goes to find out the latest and greatest about the California Delta. Steve Cooper, welcome to the Bass Pro Anglers podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Well, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to do this. I have wanted to talk about the Delta with somebody who knew this for some time, because I think the Delta, there's first of all a lot of rich history with the Delta, and I'm not sure everybody knows it, but they're going to find out today. Let's get right to this. We in California are very fortunate to have a couple of world-class bass fishing destination fisheries. Of course, Clear Lake is very well known for its population of monsters, but the California Delta also falls into that elite bass fishery category. A lot of history from the Delta. What makes the California Delta so special in your mind?
Well, it's different than any other fishery. It's a tidally influenced fishery. Obviously, tides coming in from San Francisco Bay twice a day, coming in, going out. It's a huge fishery, and it is a fishery that when people come up to the Delta, they can do things that they don't do at other lakes. You don't have to apologize about anything when you come up to the Delta. 65, 80-pound braid straight to your frog or your punch rod, and you can go out there and go mano a mano, and it's something that you just can't do. When you there's a little bit up at Clear Lake that you can get into some man-on-man stuff there. It's pretty tough stuff, but it's not it wouldn't be considered a finesse fishery. And you just come up there and you want to set hook on something and not have to worry about busting off 6-pound test leader or something. It's a good place to come when you have that rod that you don't know if you like it or you don't like it, and you just want to set the hook on something that you can 65-pound braid and just whack them, and let's see if that rod holds up. That's the place. This is the place you want to come.
The term rat is not a very complimentary term used in many places. In fact, I'm trying to think of many places where you can be called a rat and really appreciate that. But being referred to as a Delta rat, that's an endearing term. If you're labeled as a Delta rat, that's a nice thing, right?
Yeah, and I guess it is. And how do you tell you fisherman on the Delta rat? I mean, the guys ask me this question all the time. I think the best answer is you can come out here, you can look down the dock, and you're going to see a guy that's probably just as comfortable in a bass fishing tournament as he is in a bar fight, and that's a Delta rat. I think the original Delta rat was D. Thomas, the man that invented punching. He's a local guy, and the history of D and his evolution from flipping to punching to pitching, probably a guy that's changed bass fishing more than any other person. I'm sure you can go down the line, but really when you look at D. Thomas, he was the man, original Delta rat. And a friend of mine, D, passed away about a little over a year ago, but all in all, he was a little rough around the edges. Love the guy.
Nice way of describing him. Yeah. Yes.
When you met D, you know who you were talking to. So, that's a Delta rat. And yeah, if you're going to be compared to D. Thomas, that's probably a compliment.
Very good. The Delta is heavily influenced by tide swings. Can you talk a little bit about what happens to fish when the tide changes? Because that's what we hear. The tide changes. You want to be there when the tide's moving. What happens to these fish when the tide changes?
Well, and I'm going to start off by saying the Delta, for me, is what I'm going to call a river of contradictions, because every time you say something about the Delta later in the conversation, that is going to change. And partially it's because of tides. You have a tide coming in, you have a tide coming out. Now, I differ from the way that I look at tides from a lot of other people, and I try to look at it logically, because you have to separate the anglers from the guys that really know the Delta and really know the tide compared to the guys that are coming in and are not so in tune with the Delta. You can have, you know, a guy coming from back east that is just an absolute bear of a fisherman, great angler, and if he doesn't know the Delta, he's going to be at a big disadvantage. The thing about the tides, and you know, we'll probably talk about, you probably want to talk about running the tides, so on and so forth. It is such a huge fishery and such a diverse fishery. There are fish feeding at different tides at different times all day long. The problem is finding those fish. Now, there's about 1,200 miles of river on the system. What people don't understand is there's a bank on each side of that river, which doubles that 1,200 miles. And there's probably thousands of Tule Islands, which you can add another couple thousand miles. You're not going to learn that in 2 days of pre-fishing, 2 weeks of fishing, 2 months of fishing. So if you're running around trying to chase tides, that's fine if you are a experienced angler and you know the Delta. But if you are not an experienced angler and you don't know the Delta, in my opinion, all you're doing is chasing your tail. It's better to find fish, find areas that you, I will say that your style of fishing, you know, corresponds with. Maybe you're a crankbait guy, maybe you're a punch guy, maybe you're a frog guy, you're whatever you are. You can find that type of water anywhere in the Delta. And if you could, there's always going to be fish, you know, in the Delta. The fish don't always bite at the same time or in the same place. So I guess basically running the tides can win you a tournament, and it can also put you in last place. And I'll go one step further. One of the, I'd say the best tournament angler on the Delta right now is Ken Ma, probably for the last 5 years. And Ken runs the river. He burns a lot of gas. Most guys couldn't afford to pay for the gas that Ken runs on the river. And he will, he'll put on 50, 60, 70, 80 miles in a day, no problem. That big Vexus of his, many times he will be filling up 3/4 of the way through a day on a tournament day to get more gas. But Ken will tell you this himself. When you look at Ken and you look at a tournament he's fishing and you're looking at the standings, he'll tell you, look at the top 3. If I'm not there, look at the bottom 3, because that running the river can, or running the tide can pay off for you if you're Ken Ma. I always say, you know, when you go to the weigh-ins and you're watching Ken talk about run the tides, real quick, turn around and walk out in the parking lot. You'll see about 75 guys that will tell you the same thing that they tried to duplicate that Ken did, and they're packing their boats home and going home. So yeah, if you really know what you're doing out there, running the tides good and understanding the tides are very important. If not, I think it's more important to find your areas where fish are and concentrate in those areas and wait for the tide. Obviously, you could be at the wrong tide in one area at 10 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock, you're in that same area, you're in the right tide. So by kind of staying locally and fishing the water that you know, and hopefully water that you know has fish in it, you're kind of waiting for the tide to change, and the fish will tell you when the bite turns on.
Yeah, so the first time I ever fished the Delta Fish and Anglers Choice tournament there, and when I started on pre-fish, I'm like, oh my God, there are miles and miles and miles of what looks like great fish catching cover. I mean, railroad trestles. I mean, anything you can imagine, they're there, and it all looks good. And I got to tell you, I was very intimidated, and of course, the results showed that I was way out of my league. I think I can catch them a little bit there, but by no means, I was out of my league at that first time I saw that. So let's talk about then, how does somebody approach the Delta? How do you break it down? Do you just try to find a small sliver and try to get it to know it really well? What's the best approach?
You know, again, I have a, you can go out and shotgun around, and you probably want to do that a little bit. If you're coming from out of the area and you don't know the river, you're going to want to run around a little bit. And the first thing you have to do is probably look at a map. And how you run the river and where you go is important, and you really can't make any wrong moves. If let's say you're putting in at Ladd's or Russo's, which are the two kind of major tournament areas, maybe Big Break. If you look at the Delta, you want to look fishing maybe within a half a mile of the channel, and then you want to go down some of the sloughs and see what the sloughs look like. So on that first day you'd come up, you might want to run up and down the channel, see what it has to offer, maybe head down a few sloughs, and you're going to see all you need to see. There's going to be fish all over. You're going to pass up a million fish. And I always say, you look at the Delta like it's a big city. And in that city, there's a bunch of neighborhoods. And within those neighborhoods, there's a bunch of doors that you have to knock on. So if you can look at the Delta and say, you know what, I've got 2 days to pre-fish this, or I'm going to be here for a week fun fishing. You got to look at it and say, I'm not going to be able to run this whole river, but I want to look at this neighborhood, this neighborhood, this neighborhood. We're going to go around there and we're going to see, what's alike, what's different. I know people are saying maybe there's a good bite on Tule Islands, or there's a good bite on Rock Bank. There's a few guys doing reports. I do a report every Thursday. Get as much local information as you can. You can call up the Bass Hole out at Delta on Brandon Island. Rob's out there, and he's a good guy to get information from. He's a tournament angler, so don't call him in a tournament that he's fishing, but he'll give you some general ideas on where to look. But once you find the neighborhoods, it's very important to know the doors to knock on within the neighborhoods, because you can't begin to understand. You look at a place and, like you say, this looks really good. I think there's fish, or maybe you see fish there. They're just not biting. You see them cruising. Maybe you see, whatever. There's fish there. It could be the tide that's the problem. They're not, they're a fish that's biting on an incoming tide. They could be a fish that's biting on the outgoing tide. And it's hard to explain, because once you have your city, you have your neighborhood that you want to fish. Within that neighborhood, let's say it's a Tule Island that's 50 yards long, and on one side there's a point, one side there's a drop off, one side there's a flat, and on the other side there's on the other point it's a little different point that has a little different current on whatever. There's lots of things in that neighborhood that can produce fish, and some of these doors that you have to knock on, and we're going to call the doors maybe the points, the flats, the drop-offs, just like if you were in a Clearwater lake and you went into an area. There's all these little places. You might want to look for the creek channel. You might want to look for a rocky bank. You might want to look for so on and so forth. So we have all these doors that you have to knock on. The Delta becomes much more difficult, because some of these doors that you knock on may be open for catching fish on an incoming tide, and they may be closed on the outgoing tide. Those fish don't leave the island. They may go from one door over to their neighbor's house, from the point to a drop off, or a point to a flat, depending on the tide. So an experienced angler may come in that knows the Delta, hit that one door that he knows the fish hold on the point, knocks on that door with a chatterbait, buzz bait, whatever he's throwing, punches in there, nothing. He knows right away. Fish is not here. I'm going to go around, because that fish is probably moved around. He's on a flat. He'll knock on 2 or 3 of those doors. Could be a point, a flat, and a drop off. And if nothing's going, he knows that place, he's gone. And one of the real eye openers, if you get to fish with some of the better tournament anglers, what separates them from the I'll say the regular Joes is how fast they make decisions, how efficient they are in coming to maybe an island that's 50 yards long. They can efficiently fish that island for 10, 15 minutes and they'll know if the fish are there or not. And if they're there, they're going to catch them. And if they're not there, they're going to go to their next little neighborhood, and they'll start knocking on the doors in the next neighborhood. Most people will tell you they have to visit a lot of neighborhoods before they find a bite going. Bobby Barrack, another one of the, just a monster out here for 25 years. He always said, and he's won probably as many or more tournaments than anyone else, you're going to win tournaments on the Delta in a 15 to 30-minute time frame. And that's all has to do with the tides being on the right bank at the right tide. How did Bobby Barrack do it? He guided 250 days a year for 20 years. And that's how he learned the Delta. Don't try to do what Ken Ma and Bobby Barrack are doing. Find your own spots. Know what you like to fish. If you're a frog guy, if you're a topwater guy, if you're a puncher, if you're a chatterbait guy, maybe you're really good at finesse. Drop shot works in the Delta, but fish what's in front of you. And if you know there's fish in there, it looks good to you, stay in those areas and do what you can do. Don't try to, run the tides.
Steve, I mean, two things went off in my mind while you were talking about that. First of all, you talk about the neighborhood, and I'm reminded of when my younger brother and I and our buddies would trick or treat. Mom would give us an hour. She said, you can go out for an hour. You've got to be back in an hour. And you know what? We didn't knock on every door in the neighborhood because we knew some of those doors were not productive.
Right.
So we would hit more spots, more doors. I'm just going crazy when I heard you say that. It's just like, it just reminds me of trick-or-treating, because boom, we had an hour and you didn't waste your time.
Exactly. You're not wasting your time. You're being efficient. You're being efficient.
Right. And now, the next thing you said got me thinking as well. So if we're going to take this approach and we found fish somewhere during pre-fish, for example, and now it's tournament time and they're not biting, those fish that we might have caught punching in practice might be drop shot fish or crankbait fish off the bank in tournament. Is that right?
Absolutely. And you can take that a step farther when you start knocking on these doors in any given neighborhood. You can knock on one door and they're having chicken for dinner. You knock on the next door, they're having meat for dinner, and the next door they're having fish. That can happen on in a neighborhood in the Delta. So just because you have punched some fish in a certain area, maybe there's a little flat that has some hyacinth on it, you've got 3 feet of water, you're punching the heck out of them. You get off of that towards the point and you've got no punch area. That's when you throw a chatterbait on, or you throw, a deep diving crankbait, or so, whatever it may be. Very seldom, if you listen to enough weigh-ins on the Delta, when they have the interviews for the top 10, it is a hodgepodge of what people do. Like the guy that won it, maybe he was punching. Guy that comes in second, geez, he was in a different area of the Delta. He caught all his fish on a chatterbait. You think, okay, I need to punch, I need to chatterbait. You listen to the guy that came in third. Well, I was drop shotting, I was worming, or I was, doing something else. And as you go through the top 10, you're going to see some patterns, fluctuate, and you're going to see some patterns that really start to take hold. What you really need to know, and what they're not going to tell you, is where they were. I can guarantee you, the guys that all said, yeah, I got them all punching, they were in similar areas that were 3 feet deep with hyacinth. The guys that were catching him on chatterbaits were probably on a point with, a little deeper water and, having to cover a little more water, so on and so forth. So I know a lot of people talk about, is the Delta a junk fishery? It absolutely is, when you think about, the number of techniques that can be good on the same day. I constantly do this. I try to constantly tell myself that I never throw one bait more than about 5 or 6 casts unless I'm catching fish. If I'm punching and I'm catching fish, I'll stick with the punch rod. If I'm throwing chatterbaits and I'm on a chatterbait bite, but when that the bites can turn on like that and they can turn off like that. And you pretty much know when that happens. It's hard to explain, but it's like on a roller coaster, when you're coming down and you've got that big adrenaline rush and everything's going fine, you know what's happening. Then you get to the bottom and it's just, cuts off immediately. That's the delta. That's when you change baits. And boy, the more baits you can change and the more decisions you can make, especially if you are not an experienced Delta guy, if you're not Bobby Barrack or Ken Ma, make a lot of decisions, make a lot of bait changes, and you're going to see that corresponds with how many fish you catch, because you don't know how many fish you are missing by saying, oh, Steve said they're all taking chatterbaits or they're all taking frogs. I'm going to put that frog on and I'm just going to beat it to death. When you get that kind of information, go out and use that information, but don't overdo it. Use it, switch to what you think is in front of you needs to be fished. This is not good frog water. This is a good chatterbait piece of water. This is a good worm water. This is whatever. 5 or 6 casts, each little area, you're going to see patterns and you'll catch a lot more fish by making decisions. There's no wrong decisions out there. When you're not catching fish, there's never a wrong decision. The only time you're going to make wrong decisions is when you are catching fish and you decide to try something else. And that's usually because you're going to think you're going to catch bigger fish. You can't make a wrong decision there.
So what I'm hearing, and this is very encouraging to me, because I caught them really good yesterday along this stretch. It was a great day, and I've gone through it, and I didn't get a single bite.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're saying to me is you need to go back through that area with a different approach,
or at a different time. That's the other thing. If you go up and you do hit, you're not familiar with the Delta, but you hit some fish in a couple of areas, and you go back and you don't find those same fish. The one thing that you really have to do is make sure in your log that you put the area that you were fishing at the time and tide you were fishing. Now, the tide is going to change every day. So if you were going to say, I'm fishing a tournament and it's 2 weeks down the road, 3 weeks down the road, I'm going to have 2 days to fish, 2 weeks in front of the tournament and 2 days to fish a week in front of the tournament. The fish that you are able to find and get bites and catch, you really want to look at, where is the tide and where am I fishing? Then, it's all science. You can look on the day of the tournament and say, okay, I caught all my fish on a high outgo tide, and I caught my fish in these areas. Then you correspond the tide on the day that you'll be fishing to be in those areas that you want to, that you have caught fish in. You don't have to run the tide, you have to run the spots. And it's a lot easier to say, I know that I caught fish at high outgo tide on this Thule point, so I'm going to be there on high outgoing tide. Now, when I was there 2 weeks ago, that was at 10 a.m. 2 weeks later, it may be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but I want to be on that same point when the tide is, at the same level, taking into consideration moon phases. When we have full moon and no moon, that's when you get a greater gravitational pull on the tides. So you have stronger tides. That's always something that you have to take into consideration. Tidal fluctuation and what we call the coefficient out here, how much water is going to be passing through. So if you have a real hot bite that's in an area that gets really strong tides, like cuts in between Thule's, maybe you're fishing Frank's track, and there's a lot of water movement in and out of the track, and you fish that at I'll say a moon phase that has low tidal coefficients, there's not much water running through, you're going to be fishing that same area when you have a full moon and the tide's going to be ripping. It's a whole different deal. And that's where it gets to be, that needle in a haystack. Where do I go? What do I do? How do I make decisions to compensate for tides and everything else that we all have to do every day as bass fishermen? Weather conditions, so on and so forth. So, we're getting back to where we started. You're looking kind of a needle in a haystack, and in the Delta, that haystack, the needle's not staying in the same spot all the time. It's moving constantly. So now that I've talked to everybody out of never fishing the Delta, what else do you want to talk about?
Well, when I've had some success, one of the things that I've keyed in on is obviously moving tide, but when I find like breaks in Tule berms, I feel like around Frank's Track, there's a lot of Tule berms that surround Frank's Track, and when the tide is, I think it would probably be outgoing. It creates almost like a stream through there, and I've been able to get in spots like that and catch fish because I kind of fall back on my trout fishing days and fishing those little pinch points. Is that the kind of thing that somebody would want to look for? Is that something that you just wouldn't pass by or?
Absolutely. People look at, I differentiate current, tide, and water movement. If you're looking for big Florida bass, they don't like to fight current.
Right.
But guess what? They're going to be around current, and there's going to be a seam somewhere very close to that current that either has a back eddy or a seam where they can sit there, maybe on the side of the current, and see the current, see the bait that it's pulling through, come out into the current and feed, or just hold in that little back eddy and wait for the food to come to them. So, you have to make those decisions. If the current's too fast, I don't get out in the middle of the current and try to fish for bass, but I am aware of that current. I am aware of how the water is moving around, say, the point, and where it comes back into the island. Because a lot of times you'll have a heck of a current coming through, like a place at Frank's Track, and maybe you won't get anything in there. But if you follow where that current kind of stops, maybe, you've seen it before, there's a big eddy out in back. That's where everything kind of slows down. All the bait congregates. It's where you have a very nutrient rich piece of water that's not getting pushed through. It's where the real hot spot is, and that's where the fish will hold. So be aware of currents. You want to have that, currents clean out all the hydrilla and the vegetation. So you generally get fresher vegetation, which is real important out there. So current is important, but don't think you have to be in, in the heat of the current. Look for the seams, look for the back eddies, look to see, where that current starts to, slow down a little bit, where the fish don't have to fight the current. Big Florida bass don't like fighting current.
So I'm a fan of Live Electronics, forward facing sonar. I enjoy it. I enjoy the banter with Randy Blockett because he absolutely hates it, but I enjoy it, and I think I've learned a lot using it. Live Electronics, forward facing sonar on the Delta. There are not a lot of deep water places, which is traditionally how it's been used. Do you see it entering the fishing factor in a place maybe like Discovery Bay or somewhere like that, where there's some deeper water?
Absolutely. Whether you like the concept or not, it's a tool that you can use. I know that most of the guys that I know that are using forward facing sonar are using it not quite like what you would use, I'll say, at Clear Lake.
Yeah.
Clear Lake, if you're fishing a tournament, you better, and you're fishing against high level competition, you better have it, because when it comes to going up to docks and checking all the docks and stuff, it just makes you so much more efficient. Now, you can't do that in the Delta. The guys that I know that are really in tune with what's going on, they're using it more to spot vegetation, areas that, not necessarily fish. I have seen, and I don't have forward facing on my boat. I'm probably going to get it. If you're fishing stripers, it's really comes into play in the Delta. If you're fishing some of the deeper water areas, yeah, but most of the time you're not looking for fish. You're looking for structure and things of where the fish are going to be holding. With that being said, I was out with Randy Pringle, who you're probably familiar with, and Randy knows the Delta. He's an old guy like I am. He's not a big, I need every electronics known to man. We were fishing wintertime in a trough, and he was able to show me fish moving in and out of that trough. So I think it's helpful. I don't think, though, in the Delta where, let's say you're fishing Lake Erie and you're video fishing, you don't want to do that in the Delta. There is so much visual stuff that you have to be looking at as you're moving, but it's another tool. So, if you're a top grade angler and you're good with electronics, definitely forward facing sonar has its place on the Delta. If you're a weekend angler, I don't know that I would pay the money to get that.
Okay, so I just watched one of your latest videos, and you interviewed a young man that won a kayak tournament. I mean, he blasted those guys. I mean, nearly 100 inches, 25. That's about a 25-pound bag. But he said he was catching those fish as deep as 20 feet. And to me, the Delta, that's something that I don't register with the Delta. But he was catching them on grass, and I'm thinking maybe the live electronics would help you find that kind of grass.
Glad to see you paying attention. The fellow that won that tournament, Pua, is a hardcore Delta angler. He knows his stuff out here, and he has forward-facing sonar on his kayak. Okay. And from what I understand, several people say he uses it quite a bit. Now, he said he caught those fish in 10 to 20 feet of water. I don't know that, he may have been scanning that area and working that deep water, and he definitely had something going that no one else had going on. Matter of fact, the numbers that he had, 98 or 99 inches, that's almost conservatively 25 pounds.
Right.
He backed up a 25-pound limit with another conservative estimate of 20 pounds. I haven't seen a boat tournament that has done that all year. He had something going on. He had a place that he had dialed in, and obviously, I believe his forward-facing sonar at that point was extremely helpful to him. Again, 87 boats in that tournament, and a lot of this was a Western States Championship. These guys are good fishermen. They have all the electronics they need. Look in the parking lot behind where we did that interview. There's a lot of guys loading their kayaks up with forward-facing sonar that it didn't work for. And these are the best anglers out there, best kayak anglers out there. So again, it's a river of contradictions.
Well, Steve, I hate to cut this short, but we typically don't go past about 30 to 40 minutes on these. But I already know there's a part 2 coming, because we need to talk about the history of the Delta and the techniques that obviously the D. Thomas brought to us and that Bobby Barrack brought to us. I think there's a discussion in there about a time when Don Iovino won a tournament out here against D with his light line finesse techniques. I'd like to save that for another time. Would that be okay with you?
Absolutely, anytime.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
All right. See you in the future.
Caymas Boats, from the mind of Earl Bentz. Excellence, tradition, and service, all part of the Caymas advantage. On the water, perfection. This is your next boat. Build your next boat at CaymasBoats.com. Ducket Fishing, pro-driven rods, reels, and baits. The choice of champions. Check out DucketFishing.com to see what everybody's talking about. Ducket Fishing, pro-driven. And by Bait Pop. From the good folks who bought you fish formula, easy to apply, a thick paste that stays on your bait and gives your bait that extra pop it needs. Check them out at theoriginalfishformula.com. Basco Fishing is the official wardrobe partner of the Bass True Anglers podcast. Basco is making bass fishing fun again. Check them out at bascofishing.com. I don't mean to get all old-timey on you, but I do think it's important for all of us to have a perspective on how we have reached the place that we are in today. I'm an old guy. I feel like I can reach back and share some of the things that some of you might not know about. D. Thomas started the flipping technique, which has evolved to pitching, which has evolved to punching. And he shared it with a very young Gary Klein. Gary Klein was about 15 years old when he met D. Thomas, and D. Thomas took him in. Gary Klein took this technique to the East. Gary Klein gave Hank Parker his first flipping stick. Now, we all know Hank Parker won a classic flipping, but it was Gary Klein who actually gave him that flipping stick. There's your history lesson. Bobby Barrack is a regional legend on the Delta, and he popularized the frog thing. He showed the world that at what could be caught on that bait, and then Western anglers took that technique east with them. So there's your second point of history. The common denominator, there's some arithmetic for you right there, on these techniques has been the California Delta. It has been the proving ground. It has been the laboratory for a lot of things that have gone eastward. Hey, we take things from the east and apply them to our fishing in the west. It's okay. Special thanks to Steve Cooper for joining us today and giving us a very cool lesson on how to find bass on the Delta. It can be the best of times, it can be the worst of times, but I think Steve shared some really good ideas with us today, and I think it's worth maybe watching this video again and again to kind of remind yourself when you go to approach that fishery. That's going to do it for this episode. Please remember to like and follow. Hit that QR code. There it is. For some deals on some pretty cool stuff. Until next time, folks, keep those live vids zipped and clipped. Keep both hands on the wheel. That's, by the way, that's why you have a hot foot throttle, so you can keep both hands on the wheel. Stay safe, and we will talk to you again very soon. Take care now.